Welcome to the Angels Brief, the podcast series. We bring together the smartest minds in angel investing and ambitious startup founders to share their stories, insights, experience, and much more. The host for today's episode is Duran York, the CEO of Cityside Ventures and the co-founder of Birmingham Angels. So let's get to it.
Welcome, Philip.
Thank you.
Welcome to our Angel Brief podcast. We started it this year because we kind of noticed there's a hole in the conversation about early stage investing here in Michigan, and we decided to create the podcast and bring some stakeholder in the community, people that running all over the ecosystem, and talk about the importance of early stage investing, you know, what involved in early stage investing, how do we impact the expansion of early stage investing in the States, and so forth. So we and I talked about it for quite a while, about your perspective coming from the European ecosystem to the U.S. So it's going to be an interesting, entertaining podcast for people to listen to.
We hope so.
But before that, give a little bit of background. So Philip is an Australian-born entrepreneur, startup advisor, board member, mentor for a lot of emerging companies. Being founder yourself, interim, transitional, CMO on the marketing side, business development. Graduate from University of Sydney with bachelor in art, right? And diploma from, how do you spell this university?
I have a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Technology, Sydney.
Okay.
And I have a diploma, which is the equivalent of a bachelor's in psychology from Macquarie.
Macquarie. Okay.
Macquarie was a famous Australian at some point in history.
Okay, I got it. So you serve as a fractional CMO. You invested in a few companies. You were one of the co-founder of Iytro in France, I think, is a startup.
Correct.
And you contribute writer for Startup Guide in Denmark.
It's a Danish business, yeah, but I did the German version.
Okay.
Just to make it more complicated.
Okay, no, that's fine. I like complicated.
I bounced around a lot, as you can see.
Right.
Yeah.
So another way to say you've been around the ecosystem, especially in Europe, quite a bit, and you have a perspective about it. So, we're going to start with the first question that came to mind. How active is the angel investing startup ecosystem in Europe?
It's a great question. I mean, how active, I don't know how to measure that, but it's fairly active. I think one thing that made a difference in some countries, and I know this from France, is that the government changed the rules around early stage investing. So for example, I think when I made my first investment, and I haven't made as many as you, but I've made a few. When I made my first investment, you were given a 15% tax credit on that investment. So, that comes off your income for the year. And then they changed it to 30. So they doubled it. Yeah, they doubled it in, I think, around about 2018, I want to say, because the next one I made, it was 30. And that obviously, if you're able to, that is a pretty good incentive, or at least something that allows you to think about it as less risky. You get an immediate benefit in a way. You're still putting money into something. You still have to have the ability to do that, and not everyone can. But that made a huge difference in France. That doesn't exist everywhere. I know the UK rules are different. Germany's different. So obviously, the thing about Europe is you get a lot of regional differences in legislation, which is a problem. And a lot of people are talking about that in Europe at the moment. Is that needs to change? You need more regional. You need like an EU investment. What would be the word? I guess, so that it's more consistent. But I know from the French example where I lived for 4 years, that was a big thing. I'm still part of a couple of networks in France as well. I haven't invested since I came here. It's obviously more complicated being a US tax resident, but we don't need to go into the details of that. I'm sure people know. So I get pretty regular information on a bunch of investments in France. How's it changed? And to relate it to here, I think in general, the thing I've noticed the most is, particularly when you compare it to Michigan, is there's larger, I feel like people are raising more at an earlier stage, which I think is interesting. And we've talked about that before. I can't really explain that, because I thought in the US everything would be bigger, but I think in this part of the country it's just not the case. And perhaps we can.
Well, we in Michigan, after all. So Michigan, it's a maker state. It's automotive,
Yep.
manufacturing state. So in one way, you can look at Michigan as more conservative when it's come to capital than Chicago, New York, or Silicon Valley. It's people who work hard for their money, so they're not easy on the trigger, and more conservative. It went to a lot of changes in the last 10, 15 years, but we're still behind, in many ways. And that's kind of, I looked this morning, I probably get on an average of about 10, maybe more in some weeks, pitches or requests for conversation from European companies, from a couple from the Netherlands, couple from Denmark,
Okay.
UK, not so much France, Poland.
Okay.
And every time I interact with those founders and ask them why you're reaching out to the U.S., and they all say that kind of consistently the same thing, that they're raising angel funds in Europe is a little bit, it requires a lot more work than in the U.S.
Okay. Interesting.
And they're looking at, of course, raising money in the U.S., also creating an entity in the U.S. to do business here. In many ways, it's much simpler to do business in the U.S. than any other. I think the only country that work very similar to the U.S. is Israel.
Okay.
In terms of structured deals and tax benefit and stuff like that. But, it seems like that the European companies, for some reason, raise less capital. It seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, that the European company are a lot more bootstrapping type of companies. The founders is doing a lot more with less than you see in the U.S. companies. And maybe just because here you can raise so much capital. I don't know.
When you're saying the U.S., though, are you talking about where we are here, or are you talking?
I'm talking about the U.S. in general. I mean, yes.
Do you think it's different in this region?
It is.
Right.
It is. I mean, the number of activities, the number of deals, the level of checks. If you go to Chicago, New York, Silicon Valley, much higher than Michigan. No, but I'm talking about the U.S. in general.
Okay.
When I interact with the European company that asking for early stage capital, they usually come with smaller amount of requests, the valuation much more reasonable than the U.S. companies. It's kind of interesting. So that's why I'm kind of looking for your perspective.
So my comparison would be between here specifically, because I didn't really look outside Michigan. I've obviously been to events that you've held. I've been to other events. I've seen people pitch, and what they're usually asking for at the stage they're at, I feel like it's less than what I saw in France. So maybe, because you said you didn't get anyone from France, so maybe France was a bit of an outlier and it could just be the period where I lived there. You got to keep in mind, like the explosion of funding between 21 and 22. I was there during that period. So maybe I just lived there during a really good phase. And I'm not in any way, shape or form saying that it's like there's more money being raised in France than there is on the coasts. The coast here are astronomically different. And I think I've looked at some of that and looked at the numbers, and it's pretty stark, like the difference between the coast and the rest of the country. We all know that.
Yeah.
So I'm only comparing it to here specifically. But if it's funny that you say you get them from these other places. Obviously, cost of living, I think, plays a part. So if you're talking about maybe not the Netherlands, but if you're talking about like Eastern Europe, it's much cheaper to live there. It's much cheaper to live in Portugal, places like that. That can potentially play into what they expect. But the valuation is also interesting, because I had someone point out to me the other day, like European investors love a due diligence. Like it's literally what they live off. And that was a really good point that I hadn't considered. I haven't done a lot of work with institutional investors here, or at least venture firms. So I don't know their process. I'm sure it's the same as everywhere, but like the due diligence in Europe, like 70% or something like that of the people that work for VC firms in Europe are either ex-bankers or consultants. So they love their due diligence. I'm not saying they don't do it here, but we've had pretty famous examples in the US where that's been an issue. So I think that's one interesting difference as well.
Right. So between the regulators, the guidelines, the government, the due diligence, somebody that I talked to in Germany, in Berlin the other week, said that a company that take about 2 months to raise capital in the U.S. is going to take 6 to 8 months to do it in Europe.
Yeah, I mean the regulation is a question mark, and that's another difference between each country. I don't know about that time frame. I mean, so in the US, you think you could do it in around 2 months?
It seems that, again, I don't experience it firsthand, but talking to the parties on both sides of the oceans, saying that Europe, the process is slower.
Yeah.
Successful companies. So here's something that maybe we should define early stage investing, a European version and the US version.
Yeah.
So, in Europe, seems like most startups raising capital when they much further along in the process, either beyond proof of concept, maybe have some customers. They're more like a VC type stage company. So when they go to raise early stage capital, they have a lot to show already versus US company that raising capital on ideas on a napkin kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I'm not sure. I think one of the, again, I can only talk to the experiences that I've had, right? And one of the problems with that is Europe is not one entity. The EU, when it comes to investing, is not one entity.
Right.
Again, this is something that's being discussed a lot at the moment. There's a couple of pretty big initiatives that people should check out. There's one from, if you ever heard of Harry Stebbings, he's got a podcast called 20 VCs, probably one of the most well-known podcasts for VC in the world. He's got a European initiative happening right now to try and I guess get more collaboration between these different countries. There's another one from a guy called, I think it's Andrea Klinger. He was the CTO of Product Hunt at one point, which is obviously here in the US, but he's German and he moved back and he's created a European initiative to try and lobby government to make this kind of European-wide thing. But each country has different rules. So you talked about someone in Germany, like the problem with Germany is bureaucracy. Like the amount of paperwork you need to get anything done in Europe. Right. I got married in Germany. Like it took a while, right, to get the paperwork done. And
it's funny you mention it because we have an investor. She's German, from Germany, the investor in our fund over here. So every year we're sending the K1 to the investors on the fund, right? So we send it to her. She responded back, "What do you want me to do with it?" I said, "I don't know. In the U.S., you get the tax break or whatever it is. It doesn't work like this in Germany."
You can't do it.
So I was like, interesting.
Yeah.
So,
but the most notorious one in Germany that people talk about is the notary system. Have you ever heard about this?
Yeah.
So you actually, if you're if someone's buying your business, you both have to go to a notary who, I know you have notaries here, but this in Germany, a notary is a very specific person. And they have to go through the contract for the purchase, reading it out aloud in front of both of you before you can sign it. There are things like that are just completely kind of bonkers. But back to the question about whether they're raising more money, I think another thing that's that makes a difference, like, and again, I'll use the example of France. So in France, if you have a job and you want to go and work, you decide you want to go on an entrepreneurial journey, you want to work for yourself, you've got an idea you want to work on, right? You go to your employer and you agree that they're going to let you go, and you sign a piece of paper. It's called a rupture conventionnelle, and you both agree that you don't work for them anymore. And because of that piece of paper, the government pays 80% of your salary for up to 1 year, right? Now, right, which it's unemployment benefits, right? But that's how they do it in France. Now, don't quote me on the precision because I've never done it, but that's as far as I understand the way it works. So what does that mean? It means if you want to try something, you're taking less risk and you have a bit of a runway to be able to try and achieve it. So perhaps that might be why if you're seeing deals, you think that they're further along because the person has bootstrapped, but they've actually been kind of semi-supported.
Well, it's a different system because here's the government very consciously saying, we'll pay your salary up to a year. Here, if you apply to unemployment, you will have to go to job interviews. Yeah. And it's I get it.
Yeah.
It's different.
Very different.
But, if you look in the pockets in Europe, you see a lot of activities in England, for example, the UK, Ireland, Dublin become like a big ecosystem, right? Yeah. And then some Eastern European countries, just because the cost of hiring developers and things like that is much cheaper over there. But the biggest pocket you see is the UK, Dublin, France, and Germany. That's kind of the dominant countries in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Like I said, Germany is a little bit more complicated system, more bureaucracy. The UK have their own bureaucracy in different ways, but they are closest to the US in terms of doing deals. And, we have a comparable structure. Like we have Safe here, they have KISS in Europe, which is like the same kind of version, European version.
Yeah.
But it's hard to invest for me as an investor. It's hard for me to invest in an entity which is not the U.S. entity.
Yes.
So it's like go there and do there. We even tried to do an investment in Germany, and the German government there took us through a whole process of, who we are and why we are. And it's like we had to provide things that in the U.S. would never ask for us.
Right.
So like, why not make investment in Europe because of that?
Yeah. You've absolutely just nailed it. And that's what I said about the bureaucracy in Germany in particular. I can't speak specifically to each country. I can tell you that Ireland obviously did a lot of work in the 90s with tax incentives for big companies. That's why Ireland is the HQ for a lot of the biggest American tech companies. Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, they all have their HQ in Dublin. That started in the 90s. And that was the government, the federal government, the national government doing that. And that's obviously led to people, people making money, and then they try their own thing, and so they've got a pretty robust ecosystem as far as I understand, because of that self-perpetuating cycle.
Well, the whole start, I don't know if you know the whole story, but the whole start with I forgot the name of the company, but it was
Stripe,
a British entrepreneur that took a trip to Dublin, and he saw this castle that was kind of ruined, bombed, whatever, kind of deserted, and he liked the area, he decided to buy it, and then move the company to Dublin, and the local government or whatever it is said, if you're moving the company, we'll give you, and that sparked the whole thing, and then
And it's actually a bit of a problem because it's become such a thing that a lot of those companies do avoid a lot of taxes, right? So the EU government is kind of like trying to, I guess, pressure them, as far as I understand, to try and change it. But that's the Irish example. UK's always been a financial center. Like London is probably the most important financial city in the world, in my opinion, right? Because so many companies have their HQs there for a bunch of reasons. And so they have really strong tax incentives. I don't know what the exact amount is. As I said, in France, it's 30%. I think it's higher even in the UK, it was.
Right.
They have a lot of tax rules that allow people to invest in early stage. So that's the UK. France, we talked about before. Germany, I'm not sure. Germany's really interesting because Germany has a lot of parallels with here, right? A lot of manufacturing. They have a thing in Germany they call it the Mittelstand. It's the mid businesses, right? So many of them, so many cities that are specialized in one particular industry.
But in Germany, I learned something. In America, in the US, most of the big corporations are publicly traded companies, right?
Yep.
In Germany, even the largest company are family-owned businesses.
Some.
Right?
Yeah, or at least they own a percentage. Yeah, like what examples do you know about? Because I can't talk about some of them because some of them I know, obviously.
Like one example is a company over here in Wixom called DSpace, which company I know pretty well. It's a very, 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 very large German company that have operation in the U.S. It's owned by one person, Herbert. I mean, it's a family business. Macquarie, the company out of Auburn Hills that do a lot of electronics for cars, which is a gigantic company, but it's a family-owned business. So I learned that a lot of those big, gigantic German companies, actually, when you look behind it, it's owned by family businesses, or it's a majority owned by family business and other investors, which makes it different, market.
Yeah, or a trust. Sometimes it's a trust. So the original person has died, and then they've left it in the hands of a trust. That's happened. That happens quite a bit. But so back to the differences between these countries. Like there is a lot of legislative differences, a lot of tax differences. I guess if we were to compare it to here, and this is obviously something I'm interested in, we can't do that. The state of Michigan can't give a 30% tax credit. They might be able to do it on state, but obviously that's a smaller percentage of what most people pay in taxes. So it's more difficult to be able to control it in a region here. But it's the same there. The state of Baden-Württemberg, where I lived in Stuttgart, they can't do a lot with the tax differences. But
there's other way the U.S. compensate for that. For example, they can do this because the unemployment laws is kind of almost like across the board in the U.S. It's the same state to state. But the state can give a lot of non-dilutive funding for startup companies. So
True.
money that you don't have to pay back
Yeah.
and things like that. So they find a way to compensate it. But yes, the U.S. is more capitalistic in nature, not social capitalism, but pure capitalism. So in any ways, they said, listen, you want to start a business, take the risk, live with that. So it's not like we're not going to hold your hand and make sure you're going to land safely.
But that's you bring up the grants. Like when I came here and I've worked with a few people that were funded by grants, or some of the work that I've done was funded by grants. I've never had that in Europe, which is ironic because you would have thought it comes from the top down. But what you're saying is, they give away grants, but they can't do the tax breaks from the state, for example. And so the question is like, which way is a better way to do it? I don't think I think each circumstance is different. That's why you get differences between these different countries.
Yeah, but the tax code in the U.S. is also give a lot of room for investors to take tax benefit that you may or may not have it in Europe. I don't know, but like in Israel, for example, the Israeli Innovation Authority give a lot of non-dilutive funding for startup company to start the businesses. The government is very pro-business. It's very similar tax code in Israel and here in the U.S. as similar as it can get. We inherit all the bad habits from the Brits when they when
such
Palestine.
as
the
I'm not British, by the way.
The parliament system and
right,
that, you know, which is the dumbest, in my opinion, structure of government you can have.
We maybe we should talk about that after.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
I'd love to know what you think the better version would be. We could talk about that separately.
Winston Churchill said after World War II, so democracy is the worst form of government. It just beats the alternative. So,
he also said golf spoils a good walk, right? And you like golf, don't you? You're a golfer.
No,
really? Okay, you and me are the same.
I hate golfer.
Okay, well there you go. We agree with Churchill on that one.
It's a game that designed to torture human beings.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to be a part of it. Yeah. But in any case, so there's differences between the U.S. and Europe. In many ways, the size of the market, the amount of capital in play in the market. I mean, if you look in the all 50 states in the U.S. as a one package compared to the European Union. I mean, but Europe, there's also, I don't know, as a political, changes in Europe right now that many of the countries go right wing, and they want to kind of bring the economy localized again instead of being part of the, I don't know how that's going to impact the rest of the ecosystem, but it's funny, in a country like Spain, even Portugal, you mentioned Portugal. Yep. Portugal used to be a safe haven for a lot of things, but it's become like the biggest place that everybody's going right now. So 2 years from now, you're not going to be able to buy an apartment in Lisbon because it's going to be
I think it's already close to that. Yeah.
Right. So is it geopolitical changes or impact the startup ecosystem?
I mean, again, like I obviously live here now, so let's just be clear that I am a local based person now. So I don't follow every single thing that happens there. But I was there for 12 years, right? So, and I saw it go through a lot. And as you said, I started a business there that rode a wave of explosion of growth in France, right? For a bunch of reasons. And the funding wave that happened globally was part of that. So that's kind of my experience. So I have an interest in it. I don't pay attention to the day-to-day detail. But if you want to talk about, I don't know about geopolitics, but I think there's a realization, like I said before, that for startup ecosystems, country by country, city by city even, right, to grow, there needs to be more collaboration between EU states. And one of the problems with the EU is that it's very administrative heavy and each country wants to maintain their own national identity, which is perfectly valid. And therefore, there isn't the ability to collaborate between those. So I don't know about geopolitics. Things happen, like you said. People used to go to Portugal because it was like a third the cost of Germany, let's say, for almost everything. That's not the case anymore. Portugal gave away visas, right? These things happen. The Irish example from before, where they obviously gave tax incentive, these things happen, and then the EU government tries to kind of balance things out. I think, like, if we want to talk about what can Europe do, and I'm not sure that's, it doesn't help us. We're more interested in what happens here. But what can Europe do? I think it's probably like changes to labor laws in terms of like flexibility. That's a big thing, the big difference between the two countries. Right, but the context
of the question is not so much what, between you and I don't care what Europe's going to do. But my question is more in the context of, what's going to take from us as an investor, because there is some good companies in Europe.
Fantastic companies there.
What is going to take for us to do business with companies in Europe?
The thing that blocked you in investing was the German administration?
The
or
German
was it,
administration, we did one deal in London, which is also, it was a little bit more complicated. Here, your investor say, I want to put money in a company. I send you a DocuSign, sign the DocuSign, send the money in, we're done. Over there, there's a bureaucracy and an notary, and you know, the bank need to see you signing the document. You can do it, and you know, it's like old-fashioned thinking.
Yeah.
So you know, things of that nature.
I mean, that has to change, right? And that's what I was getting at with these different initiatives that people like the 20 VC example, like the Andres Klinger example. I think it's called EU/ACC. That's what they're on about, right? The fact that it isn't easy, first of all, from border to border, even
Right.
the same problems that you experience going from US to Germany,
Right.
we would have going from France to Germany. That's the real stupidity of it, right? Or the real craziness that people are complaining about. So there is an effort to try and change that, at least within the EU. And you would imagine that in doing so, they would hope that that would come from outside. I mean, if we think about it from a national government's point of view, why would you not want investment from outside? Why would you not want to make
You
ways?
do, but you know, with government, it's kind of funny. It depending who's sitting at the helm, because you know, yes, why the government shouldn't want foreign investor? Yeah, everybody wants it, but then you get to the micro politics and everybody fight for their own power struggle, and then things don't get done, especially in a bureaucracy.
Yeah,
you know, kind of thing. Even the U.S., but the U.S. are much more pro-business in fundamentally as being the capitalistic society. So we're much more pro-business. As Trump also is like, it's all about business. I mean, you know, can we get it done, and it's and can we do it well, and it's going to make a difference. So it's like the business proposition. Even in Israel, I'm from Tel Aviv, right? So if you ask me, where do you want to start a business in Tel Aviv? When you're in the U.S., no question.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I may have a team in Tel Aviv. I may keep some activities over there, but from the doing business perspective, the U.S.
And this is because of the ease with which you can do a deal, basically.
It's the easy you can do a deal. It's the tax break that you get. It's the market size opportunities. It's less complicated from bureaucracy perspective. And then here's the thing. Israel is like, for example, there's an exodus of a lot of Israeli company moving to Miami right now.
Okay.
To headquarter in Miami in the U.S. entity, just because Israeli like the warm weather. It's not because
who doesn't?
Yeah. So and then the Wix, which is the Israeli company the website company that Wix.
Okay. Yep.
They headquartered in South Beach, and the owner bought a lot of properties around it and kind of created an ecosystem for Israeli companies to come in. So a lot of them moving to Miami right now, and because Israel, for example, is a company in war right now. So what will happen is the war is prolonged. The government will have to find ways to offset the cost, and it may even risking changing the tax codes and other things. You know, who said the government cannot tell you tomorrow you can't take more than $50,000 out of the country for the next 10 years? So a lot of people got freak out and say, like, wait a minute, before we get to that point, we're going to get out. So there's you know, it's the same that happened in Germany after the war.
Do you, because you're one of the few people here who has experienced and dealt with a lot of people outside the country, so this is another good reason for us to talk about this. What place would you say has the greatest parallels with Michigan? What country would you compare the most? And by that example, is there anyone we could look at to maybe learn from? Because I think we both agree that like more needs to be done here locally. We've talked about that before, and we need more early stage capital. Definitely, I saw you you were talking about this the other day. You had a bit of a rant about it, which I supported. I think you said it exactly right. So, do you think there's anywhere we could look at as an example that we could copy? And I'm flipping the questions back on you.
No, I
think it's
appreciate
a good thing.
it. I mean, because that's the thing that I, you know, keep me up in the morning when I wake up and I ask myself, what else can we do? Because I see the deal flow, I see the companies, I see the dynamic and all the, you know, you've been around the block, you know, from Detroit to Oakland County, to Ann Arbor, to Grand Rapids, to Kalamazoo, to North Michigan. There's a lot of activities in the ecosystem, but all those activities, it's like a rocking horse. There's a lot of motion, but not a lot of movement. So it's like there's motion, but he doesn't get anywhere. So I keep seeing that the lack of early stage capital at play
Yeah.
which is the early stage capital kind of lift the ecosystem up. So when you have early stage capital, then the VC now have a deal flow, and then the private equity have a deal flow, and the capital starts circulating in town. It doesn't happen. And when it does happen, it's very small amounts of money.
Yeah.
Because in Michigan, there's one thing that both Tel Aviv, even Berlin, Germany, London, I know for sure. You know, Silicon Valley, Chicago, New York, they have what we call super angels. Michigan doesn't have them. So
France as well, by the way. France has quite a few as well.
So the super angels that you have in Silicon Valley, like Peter Thiel and Brodko and all those guys. When I say super angel, I'm talking about somebody who can write an independent check for like $2-3 million without syndicated with 27 other investors. We don't have them in Michigan. So it's required a lot more syndication. It's required a lot more collaboration between the angel groups. But all the angel groups here in Michigan are not really working together as one community. Everybody's still doing their own thing. We supposed to share deals, get together once a month and talk about it, but it doesn't happen in the level of, you know, I see a deal, I immediately send it to everybody else and say, hey, let's take a look at it. No, it's kind of, if I cross-pollination with somebody, great, but if not, then I go on a call sometimes and I see the companies that they're looking at, I didn't know if exist.
I never thought of that actually, because like I said, I'm a part of 2 groups in France, and they're France. Whereas here, it's like, it is much, like in Detroit, we have 4 or 5 that I know of that are very kind of independent of each other. And that would make a huge difference.
Yeah, it is. It's like we're doubling the effort. We're dragging the founders to the mud to go pitch this group and this group and this group and this group. Everybody do their own due diligence, their own thing. Why? Why are we doubling the efforts and everything we do? And when I ask the question, everybody look at you like dumbfounded, like, well, I don't know. It's kind of like, because that's just the way we do it. You know, and it's shocking to me that that's the case. I'm going to have here later today Patty Glazer from ID Detroit, you know, talking about, you know, they're the big force of early stage investing here in Detroit and Michigan. But again, I will see some people from ID Detroit, and they're going to talk to me about some companies, but I don't get them a weekly or monthly, here's a list of company we're investing in, take a look at them. And being proactive, like, here's the company we're looking at, here's the due diligence within the company, here's what we think about it. No, it's kind of like, here's the company, and then you have to ask for the other piece of information, then you have to ask the other piece. It's like, it's like, if you go to Silicon Valley, you go to Luigi, there's a cafe in Palo Alto called Luigi Cafe. You go there in the morning for coffee at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. The place is full with VCs and investors, and it's go like this. Hey, I got an AI deal. Everybody's interested. Boom, everybody's around the table talking about the deals, and then boom, it moved to the next level. Nobody hold it to the vest. Nobody thinks that their deal's supposed to be like nobody else should look. It's like, no, it's
seen as this is an international conversation, right? And I know that's the purpose of me being here, and you and I have talked about this a lot. I'll add another example that I think is really interesting, and that's Australia, where I'm from. So Australia has 2, maybe 3 huge successes in total, right? But they're enormous. So one is Atlassian, which I think everyone knows. The other one is Canva, which also everyone knows. The third one is Afterpay, which got bought by, I think it's now called Block, used to be Square. So those 3 are huge successes. But the 2 first ones in particular, you know, they've been around for like 10, 15 years. And someone told me once I was in Sydney, you know, I haven't lived there for 13 years, so I don't know the ecosystem that well. I know people in it. I talk to them, I ask questions. And an investor there, I was having lunch with him. He told me, like, he said, no one, exactly like you just did. He said, no one collaborates here. I said, what do you mean? He said, so the people that made money out of the Atlassian and Canva deals, they're sitting on, you know, success and pots of money, let's say, and they do invest it. But if they've got a deal, they don't go talk to the other guys who've also won out of one of these deals. They don't share them. They don't tell each other because they want to hold it to themselves. And I found that a really interesting example. And because, you know, especially when it comes to venture deals, you know, there's a lead investor, but if they can't get other people to go along with it, it's usually not as successful. So that collaboration is part of the game, I would have thought. But
the one thing that, just to kind of, before running out of time, to kind of put in context, if a company raises $1 million round, I'm an investor putting some of the initial money in the company, I will, and I don't have a rock star funder that can close the
Yep.
deal in 30 days.
Yeah.
It's going to take him 3 or 4 or 5 months. There's some companies it took 8 months to raise the capital. So he going to raise capital, going to burn it to get more capital, going to burn it to get more capital. By the time he got to the final stop, half of the money got wasted on raising more money. So there's a vested interest to all the angels to syndicate it as fast as possible, go build the business instead of, hey, I'm pitching Point Angels on Tuesday and Birmingham Angels on Wednesday and North Michigan Angels on Thursday. It's like, can we do one pitch that everybody's looking at it? It's like,
How do we do this? How do we, come on, let's solve a problem right here.
I talked to the ecosystem, and everybody have their own membership structure.
Yeah.
And all, they make money one way or another from the investor. And everybody want to keep their thing. And it's funny. I'm looking at Point Angels. We invested in half of their portfolio of companies. I'm looking in North Michigan Angels. We have about 6, 7 companies. So it's like, we're all investing in the same company at the end of the day. So why are we not?
You know the worst part about that is the founder had to go, as you just pointed out, had to go and pitch those 2-3 times.
Right.
I mean, that's the worst part about
and
it.
And then, so you do all the work, but not the reward, but you don't get the reward. So if you come to Birmingham Angels, to, let's say, start Point Angels, you get $200,000 checks. You go to this group, you get 150. So you do all the work and you get small checks. It's not like somebody writes you the check and
no economies of scale, basically.
No economies of scale. So, but that's Michigan.
Yep.
It's different in Chicago. It's different in New York. It's different in Miami. It's different in Austin, Texas. In Silicon Valley for sure. But I'm not envy Silicon Valley. I think
not at all.
I think as much the activities in Silicon Valley and the level of deals and all that stuff, it's still a lot of dumb money over there. It's all spray and pray, and they are the bad habits of crazy valuation. The invention of the unicorn era, which is, I think, I'm writing a new blog post says, I'm to hell with the unicorns. I'm looking for camels.
I saw your LinkedIn post that
Right.
you went on. I was literally thinking, like, have we ever talked about this? Because I 100% agreed with you, and it looks like a lot of people did, right?
Right.
We're at that point now where it's like something needs to change, something needs to happen differently. And to your point about I don't envy Silicon Valley, my personal feeling is Michigan is one thing. I do think there's collaboration to take place between the different Midwest states.
Right.
And so I've got to saying this thing to people like, we can't look at Silicon Valley, we can't look at Boston, we can't look at New York. Midwest problems require Midwest solutions.
Right.
And so therefore, like, we've got to think of like what would make sense for us. And I think that's back to your collaboration about the different angel groups, right? It's the same thing with the states. There isn't necessarily a reason for them to do it. It's not in their vested interest because they want people to move there.
No, it's
but
not.
We have to do it together to make it work.
But we had like an enlightenment or aha moment last year that I started realizing Michigan always talked about competing with Silicon Valley.
No.
And eventually I said, Michigan is a maker state. We need to stop thinking software and we not start thinking hard tech. And we start shifting our focus to looking for more hard tech companies in Michigan. And the whole business is going around drones right now and things in Michigan. Michigan can be a manufacturing for a lot of things, but not software, but more hard tech. But that for another topic to talk about it. But, I appreciate it because I also, the conversation, when we may miss some points and didn't hit all of them, but people out there that looking to get into angel investing need to listen to it to understand. Another way to say it, how great we have it here compared to other places in the world. It's still the greatest place to do business is the United States in many ways. Yeah. Everybody wants to come here. Everybody wants to do business here.
That's what I'm trying to learn and benefit from I've only been here for just over a year, so I'm still trying to work it out. So I appreciate you inviting me on, but also like the information you've shared with me and the stuff we've talked about before, because I'm still new to it, but I'm happy to talk about what I know from elsewhere.
Right. And I'll give you an assignment, kind of, keep collecting some,
Please.
Talk to your counterparts in Europe, and otherwise maybe we do another segment later in the year, talk about the European market again and kind of what's because there is a lot of foreign division in Michigan, German companies, Chinese companies, everybody's here in Michigan. There's a gateway from Michigan to Europe
Oh yeah.
more than any other state in the United States.
That is one thing we didn't get to cover, and we've talked about how do we connect it, but you said the problems you'd had in trying to invest over there, and I understand that. But I do think there's a lot of connections to be made. I've proposed them to people before, and I have made some. But you talked about angel investing specifically. One of the groups I said I'm part of in France is actually run by a guy who went to university for a time in Kalamazoo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so maybe we should get him on.
Oh, yeah. So find who he is,
Yeah.
and I'll definitely would like to invite him either virtually or to the podcast. But, Michigan have an opportunity to put a line in the sand to say we are the maker state, that if you are a tech company that makes stuff, Michigan is the place to be.
Yep.
And that's the message that we need to be out there.
Yep.
So
Agreed.
I appreciate you taking the
No
time.
problems.
I appreciate
Thank you,
your
sir.
insights. And as always, the more people talk about it, the better it's off for other people to listen. So
Agreed.
we'll see each other around the block and
No
go
problems.
from there.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Cheers.
Are you interested in becoming a member and joining our group? Please contact Jerron York by phone 248-981-6688 or visit our members' website by using the following QR code. We are looking forward to talking to you soon.